Are you familiar with the phrase, a come to Jesus moment? I think we've probably heard this phrase before. It's one of those phrases that is said, but not normally in a context like here. Now we can say, okay, we know where that phrase comes from. It comes from like a church moment or a revival moment, but it's not used in that way anymore. I would say so much so that normally we wouldn't want to say that phrase because it's been used in a way that we might see as disrespectful. To make something as serious as a come to Jesus moment, but then to use it in any sort of way. But maybe we need to rethink that. Here is what ChatGPT said about this phrase. I said, okay, just tell me very briefly what this phrase is about. And so here's what it gave me. A come to Jesus moment is a sudden realization that forces someone to face the truth, admit they were wrong, or make a serious change. Often after denial, failure, or consequences catch up with them. So I would say this is an important moment in someone's life. It doesn't have to be negative. It doesn't have to be because of something negative, but it's an important moment that forces us to look at what's going on. So maybe it is a word and a phrase that we should think about. Because for the last 5 weeks, we've been looking at the story of Jesus. Throughout the season of Epiphany, we have been looking at Jesus' baptism, the Magi visit, we looked at his dedication at the temple, and now today, we look at probably the most important moment in his life, outside of the moments in Holy Week and Easter. So take all that's about to happen in Holy Week and Easter and put it aside. This moment in Jesus' life is probably the most important moment. It's a moment that we need to consider, and maybe it will bring us to Jesus. Maybe it'll be our come to Jesus moment to say, wait a minute, this story is going to call us to think about him in a certain way. So this is my invitation and challenge to all of you. Let's take this story that can be weird, easy to ignore, and instead let's take a look at it and see it as an opportunity to come with Jesus and to meet with him. So are you ready to meet with him today? In Matthew 17, 1 through 9. If you want to turn to this in your Bibles, Pew Bible, it's page 1399. Matthew 17, 1 through 9 is the passage again. So let's take a look at this passage and see how it invites us to meet with Jesus. So this is how this passage starts. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. So this is right in the middle of a story. So the first thing we notice is that Matthew says after 6 days. So if you're reading this in your Bible, say you were open to Matthew 17, you start in verse 1, and it says after 6 days. If we're going to be good Bible readers, what's the first thing that we should ask? What happened 6 days ago, right? We should go back and be like, okay, well, what happened earlier? Clearly, Matthew wants to connect these. So if we go back into chapter 16, we see a couple of things. We see that Jesus has a conversation with the Pharisees. We see that he uses this conversation as a learning moment for his disciples. And then he tells them something important. He says, we're going to go to Jerusalem, and I am going to be arrested and put to death. And then that prompts Peter to say to Jesus, how could you ever say that? And Peter ends up looking bad in that whole scenario. And then Jesus says, some of you will still be alive when I come into my kingdom. So that's all that happens in the passage before this. And then it's after 6 days. So really, it doesn't make sense that they're connected. That conversation could have happened at any point. And then 6 days later, why 6 days? Well, that's an important question. And that's what we need to ask. And when we look at our passage from Exodus, I think we're going to see why Matthew says this. So we're going to look at a couple of these verses again. First, chapter 24, verse 12. The Lord said to Moses, come up to me on that mountain and stay here, and I will give you the tablets of stone with the law and commandments I have written for their instructions. So first, Moses is going to go meet with God on a mountain. Now we're going to skip to 15 and 16. When Moses went up on the mountain, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai. For 6 days the cloud covered the mountain, and on the seventh day the Lord called Moses from the mountain. And then Moses goes in. The reason that Matthew uses after 6 days is because he wants to connect this story from Exodus to what's going to happen with Jesus on that mountain. So there's a couple of similarities, right? The first thing is obviously the mountain. The second similarity is here in Exodus, he's on the mountain, Moses is, for 6 days outside this cloud. And then on that seventh day, that's whenever he's called into the cloud. On that seventh day, that's when Jesus and his 3 disciples go up on the mountain. So when Moses is on this mountain, he has an encounter with God. And he meets with God. And he receives the covenant, the law. And Israel enters into this agreement with God. This is the height of Moses' ministry. So this is signaling to us something important about Jesus. So again, are we ready to meet with him on this mountain? Are we ready to see what the mountain experience is all about? Are we going to follow Jesus on top of a mountain in our life? Now, the disciples were invited to have this experience with Jesus, and I believe each and every one of us is invited on a regular basis to have an experience with Jesus, to have our own mountaintop experiences where we get to know him for who he truly is. Now, these experiences don't have to be at the top of a mountain. Like we think about the top of a hill of a roller coaster. Like life is really good, we're on a mountain, we're really high. Maybe we actually meet with God in the valley, and that becomes our mountaintop experience. Mountaintop experiences aren't about where you're at in life, it's about encountering God. And that's what happens for the disciples. So they go with Jesus on the mountain. Let's see what happens. So let's go back to Matthew chapter 17, verse 2. There he, Jesus, was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. So the first thing that we're told is that he is, and the word that's used is transfigured, which is a weird word, right? This is that story, if you do read the gospel, and you get to this story, it's in all 3 of the first ones, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. You just go, okay, I don't know what this story is about. I remember the first time I read it, when I was in college, when I read my gospels for myself for the first time, I was like, I've never heard this story. What in the world? Now, the best thing I can say is that this is Jesus' Beauty and the Beast moment. Now, if you've seen the Beauty and the Beast, you know at the very end, the beast is on the balcony. He has just done what he was supposed to do to break the curse. And he's lifted into the air, and he is transformed. He changes from the beast back into human form. So Jesus this is his Beauty and the Beast moment, but he's not actually transformed. He is revealed. So the Beauty and the Beast moment has to be meshed with this other moment. There's this TV show I used to watch in college called Supernatural. It was a show about these brothers who would hunt these mythical creatures. Now, these creatures would look human, but if they saw them in certain ways, their true identity would be revealed. So the one way that often happened was on a video camera or a picture. Something about the creature would look different, and they would know that it's not a human. And then another way, sometimes it would work, is in a mirror. So the creature would look like a human, but if you saw its reflection in a mirror, you would realize what it really was. Its true identity would be revealed. And so Jesus goes onto the mountain, and his true identity is revealed. He is the Son of God. He shines with the glory of God. He radiates God's glory. So this is what happens. Now, we'll talk about what that means in a moment, but let's just keep going. Verse 3. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. And so now we have these 2 Old Testament figures who show up on this mountain. Many people will know who Moses is. Moses was the leader we just read about in Exodus. He was a leader who led Israel out of slavery in Egypt. He took them to Mount Sinai. He met with God. He brought them the law that made them a nation, God's chosen nation. He was one of the most important figures in their history. Elijah, you've probably heard his name. Maybe you can't connect anything to him at all, though. He's a prophet from 1 Kings. He was a prophet to the northern kingdom, specifically during King Ahab and his queen wife, Jezebel. You've maybe heard of Jezebel because a lot of people have heard about the name Jezebel. It kind of has a negative connotation in our culture, specifically from past generations. Elijah's run-in with Jezebel and Ahab goes deep. He continues to challenge them because they want the northern kingdom to worship false gods, specifically the god called Baal. If you've ever read the Old Testament, B-A-A-L, sometimes it's all one word, sometimes it's split. And so eventually Elijah has this showdown with prophets for Baal, where he says, okay, I want you to try to build an altar and call on Baal to consume this sacrifice. And they do it, they do it, nothing happens. So then Elijah says, okay, I want you to dump a bunch of water on this sacrifice that I have built. And he tells them to put more and more water on it. And he calls on the name of Yahweh, and fire rains out of the sky and consumes this sacrifice. And this actually forces Elijah to go into hiding, because Ahab and Jezebel, after this, they want to execute him. And so he runs to the mountain of God, to Mount Sinai, and he has his own mountaintop experience. So both of these figures have mountaintop experiences with God. Also, they have mysterious deaths. Moses is buried by God. Elijah is actually taken away by a chariot of fire. He never actually dies. So these two figures in the days of Jesus are associated with the return of God, the end of the age, the time where things are going to get better for Israel. So it'd basically be like us going with a politician in Washington, D.C., and all of a sudden, Abraham Lincoln or Benjamin Franklin or George Washington show up and meet with this politician. It's supposed to be like, this is the next chosen founding father. Now, I know we're like, that sounds wild. That would never happen. Okay, well, I don't think anybody thought that they would see Jesus meet with Moses and Elijah either. That's how special this encounter is. This moment clearly shows us that Jesus was very special. So how does Peter, James, and John react? How would you react if you were on this mountain? Well, this is what they do. Verse 4. Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. So Peter is the first to talk. If you read scholars who write commentaries on this book, they don't know what Matthew's doing, or not Matthew, Peter. They think that Peter just doesn't know what to do. So he's like, oh, well, let's build shelters. There's nowhere for us to sleep. I can do it. I can do something. But we're going to see that they don't need the shelters, because this is what happens next in verse 5. While he was still speaking, this is Peter, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, this is my son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. So now a cloud covers them, and they hear a voice speak. Now, if you were here when we talked about Jesus' baptism, a voice speaks. But when you read in Matthew specifically, it makes you think that only Jesus hears the voice. There's people there, but they don't hear it. But now it's clear that Matthew is reporting that Peter, James, and John also hear the voice. So the voice says, this is my son whom I love, and I'm well pleased. And it also says, listen to him. So it's the voice talking about Jesus to the disciples. They're hearing the voice so they know about Jesus. Also, this is another connection to our Exodus reading. So Exodus 24:17 says this. So this is now at the bottom of the hill. The Israelites are looking up on the mountain. To the Israelites, the glory of the Lord looked like a consuming fire on top of the mountain. So remember, there was like a cloud of smoke on the mountain that Moses enters. And now the Israelites see God's presence on the mountain. The disciples are with Jesus, and the presence of God, like that moment in Exodus, descends on the mountain. They enter into the cloud, just like in Exodus whenever Moses enters the cloud. And in the cloud, they hear God speak. Now, if that were you, how would you respond? This is what happens. When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. They were terrified. Have you ever had your breath taken away? In a good way or a bad way? All of a sudden, something happens that's so shocking, that's so surprising, that your breath goes. That feeling in your chest. Maybe you've had that feeling of sudden shock or terror, where all of a sudden you think something horrible is going to happen or has happened, and there's nothing you can do about it. Or maybe you've been to a place that's been so awe-inspiring that you feel small and powerless in comparison. These different feelings, they kind of all go together. Some are good, some are bad, some are sort of a mix of fear and awe and terror and being terrified. I think that was what the disciples felt, but to infinity. When people encounter God in the Bible, this is how they react, with terror, because they realize how small they really are. And the disciples have this moment, but then all of a sudden it's over. Verse 7, but Jesus came and touched them. Get up, he said, don't be afraid. When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. So just like that, this moment is over. And there is Jesus, the man who just caused this, who is saying it's okay, helping them up, making sure that they're okay. This is the God we serve. And this is who Jesus is. Jesus is the Son of God who came in his Father's glory. This story shows us who Jesus truly is, who he came to be. Jesus, the Son of God, came in his Father's glory. To this point, we've known that he's someone important, maybe someone special, a unique prophet, a unique healer, a very gifted teacher. People are interested in him, they want to follow him. But remember, that's just what he was. But all of a sudden, he's revealed to be more. Jesus is the Son of God who came in his Father's glory. So again, I want to ask you, are you ready to meet with Jesus? Are you ready to follow him up onto the mountain to discover who he really is? Because Peter, James, and John did. And after they went on the mountain, this is what happened. Verse 9, as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them. He said, don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. So Jesus says, hey guys, I know that was weird. I know that you're probably still shaking. Maybe you need a nice shower or a bath, whatever they did to bathe back then. I don't want you to tell anybody about this yet. Wait until the Son of Man is resurrected or raised from the dead. Now that alone, they're like, okay, what's that about? But like, we're not going to tell anybody. Nobody's going to believe us. We're not sure if that really happened. Maybe each and every one of them hasn't actually talked to each other to be like, did you see this? Maybe they all thought it was a dream. Who knows? Jesus says, just don't talk about it. So they didn't. But eventually things happen. Jesus does have Holy Week and Easter. And then Peter, James, and John remember this story. And then so much so that Peter is able to talk about it later. When he writes 2 Peter, this is what Peter says. For we did not follow cleverly devised stories when we told you about the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ in power. But we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. He received honor and glory from God the Father when the voice came to him from the majestic glory, saying, this is my Son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. We ourselves heard this voice that came from heaven when we were with him on the sacred mountain. Peter is talking about that moment. He is saying, this is not just a fairy tale. This is not just a clever story. People want us to believe that today. Just this week, I had conversations with people on social media, not people that any of us know, just whenever we have conversations, about how the Bible is all made up. Certainly you don't believe that, is what someone told me. Certainly it's all a myth. It's not true. Peter is writing this letter, and he says, I saw it with my own eyes. I heard that voice. I experienced that terror. Jesus, the Son of God, came in his Father's glory, and I witnessed it. This is our come to Jesus moment. The Mount of Transfiguration makes it clear to us that Jesus isn't just a teacher, isn't just a healer, isn't just a prophet. He's someone more. And so we're invited to then follow him up the mountain. Are you ready to follow Jesus? Do you believe the story is true? Don't you want the story to be true? This is the thing I don't understand sometimes when I talk with people who don't believe the story. Some people think it's too good to be true. There's no way that that story is real. The world is too messed up. Things cannot be that good. Don't we want the story to be true? That Jesus came to restore the world. That he came in his Father's glory as the Son of God. This is our come to Jesus moment. So this is our final week before Lent. Like I said, Wednesday is Ash Wednesday. It's the beginning of Jesus' journey towards Holy Week. So this is your invitation. Will you follow Jesus up to the mountain of Mount Calvary? Because that's ultimately where he's going and where he's inviting us to go. Remember, God says, "This is my son, listen to him." He's going to be telling us that he is going to the mountain. And the invitation is for us to follow. The Transfiguration makes clear who Jesus is. Jesus is the Son of God who came in his Father's glory. We have to come to terms with this. Peter saw it. He heard the voice. Jesus was more than a teacher. He was more than a sage or a wise person with advice. He was more than a healer or a prophet. Jesus, the Son of God, came in his Father's glory. So are we ready to meet with him on the mountain? Again, I invite you, join us on Wednesday at 7 p.m. as we start this journey. Join us as we go to Mount Calvary with Jesus. Because Jesus, the Son of God, came in his Father's glory.